And we welcome in for another weekly edition of our 9 a.m. RaidRecover.com Inside the Paint Show. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel here in Fort Lauderdale. He's crack of dawn Kurt Helin, we like to call him here. He's out in the LA area. He, of course, is from NBCSports.com, Pro Basketball Talk. Kurt, we're getting to critical mass here.
Yeah.
Final 3 weeks of the NBA season. I want you to first give a national perspective, and then I'm going to give the local perspective here. We try to do both here on RaidRecover.com Inside the Paint. Who's happy in the NBA right now? In other words, with 3 weeks to go in the NBA season, and you look at the standings, you look at the setup of how the playoffs are going to shake out, you look at, and this to me is the key word, expectations. Who's happy in the NBA? Who's waking up on this Wednesday morning on March 21st and saying to themselves, you know, March 22nd, whatever the hell the day is, and saying to themselves, you know what? We feel good about ourselves. Kurt, give me some optimism to start the day, if you could, please.
Yeah, there's not a lot. I was a really good point. There are a couple. I mean, I think if you're a Bucks fan, you're pretty comfortable with where you are. You've got the top seed in the East. Your team's kind of clicking. Philly fans might be okay with where they are, although they're Philly fans, so they're never happy, Ira. They're just not. Outside of that, I mean, Oklahoma City, your seventh seed, saw that last night. Like they're surprisingly good, but outside, and maybe, you know, hey, if you're a Pistons fan, it's what you might not be happy, right. But
there's two,
but there's not a lot of. You're right, like the few teams are meeting the expectation of what they had for this season.
Yes, and again, and I apologize because I know Kurt does a ton of national radio interviews, so do I. And you get these questions foisted at you at the last minute, and you're like, let me go through my head as I'm staring into the camera. So I'm going to give you two more that I think are the best two stories of teams that are really content where they are. Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I'm like, what was I thinking? How did I leave them off?
Sacramento Kings, I think, are number one. And the New York Knicks. I know Knicks fans, and you know how it is, going back to the Mark Berman days of the Post, the Knicks fans always think they're a championship away, that it should happen for them. But I think, Kurt, you would agree that this season, the New York Knicks have to be content where they are. And at least to this point, I know the goal might not have been the number 5 seed, but, you know, the Julius Randle is playing, I don't want to say MVP level, but putting up MVP numbers occasionally. And it's interesting. And let's be honest here, Kurt Helin, because our RaidRecover.com Inside the Paint Show goes back to the summer. We spoke about free agency. We both had our doubts about Jalen Brunson and the money they paid him. I would say Jalen Brunson has filled 2 boxes this season. The free agent acquisition who has done the most to help a team change their fortunes, number one, and the free agent loss that's most hurt a single individual team. Because all Dallas has done this season is try to chase answers for having lost Jalen Brunson, including the desperation of moving for Kyrie Irving. So I think the Knicks, because of Brunson and because of Randall, the Sacramento Kings are the sort of feel-good stories in the NBA. My greater take to this was, man, you look at the standings. You look at the Celtics going through a little bit of a rough patch now. I mean, you know, all year it's been good news out of Boston. Then they go ahead and they give an extension to Joe Mazzulla, and okay, we're done. We're past the Ime Udoka thing. This guy's the greatest coach in the world. Now, not so much. The Cleveland Cavaliers, as good a season as they've had, I think they thought they were going to be even better than some of these road woes that they've had this season. So I think there's questions there. Anyone below the Knicks in the Mendoza line in the conference thought they were going to be better. Certainly the Miami Heat, and we're going to get to that, of course, more. Please chime in on our chat board. I see we still got some Dolphins leftovers here. Big O is gone, so he's not going to get angry at you if you turn it to basketball. Join us on our chat board on YouTube if you could. Be glad to get to all your questions. I think the Heat, the expectations were higher. I think the Toronto Raptors, you and I have spoken about every week, I think their expectations were higher. Chicago Bulls, certainly with their quote-unquote big three, with DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, and Lonzo Ball to a degree also. I thought, and Zach LaVine, who I always forget, thought they were going to be better. Washington, with Porzingis getting a full season in there, thought they were going to be better. And certainly the Atlanta Hawks, having already gone through a coach this season, thinking, and the trade they made for DeJounte Murray, and they mortgaged their future, thought that they would be better. So looking at the Eastern Conference, If you were to pick out, and again, you're in LA, so don't worry about Heat fans. They're not knocking on your door. Who would you term the biggest disappointments in the Eastern Conference?
Honestly, from preseason expectations, the Heat come in second or third, but it's Brooklyn. Because remember, Brooklyn was going to be it. Remember, they had Kyrie, they had
perfect example.
They were going to be all of it, and nobody has blown up and literally blown up the roster quite the same way as Brooklyn. After that, Atlanta internally had way higher expectations, and hence the new GM, the new coach in the middle of the season, everything else. Because in no way did the owner and owner's son push for these trades over the objections of the guys who were fired. And then I think Miami comes after that, just because this was, like, as we've discussed and fans know, this was a team that went so far and showed such promise in the playoffs last year, and it felt like brought back so much of the core, and it just hasn't lived up to expectations, even if, though I'm kind of with you, I think they've got a really good shot at the 6th seed right now. But we'll talk about that later. I think everybody expected. If you had told me they were fighting to stay in the top 6, I would have been shocked.
Yeah, it's just so you have that going on. Of course, like you say, with Brooklyn, there's been no team that's been as dynamic this season in its changes. I mean, to go from the Durant and Kyrie core to a bunch of quote-unquote nice players, and you and I know what a bunch of nice players get you in the NBA. They get you a bottom playoff seed, maybe. They get you a play-in berth, more likely. It's sort of interesting now that the NBA, instead of being two tiers, playoffs and lottery, now that there's that third tier in the middle here, the play-in teams, those are the teams sort of caught in that limbo of good, but not good enough. So I think it's an interesting tier that Adam Silver added in. I already wrote this at the Sun Sentinel. You and I have discussed it. I think the play-in tournament is fantastic, unless you would have been a 7 or 8 seed otherwise and not had to sweat out all of this. Yeah. But it has kept the league alive. Kurt Helin. I mean, we are talking mid to late March. And we are talking about teams, Oklahoma City, perfect example you brought up, underachieving teams in the East that at least can pretend. I'd say the Washington Wizards have another week of pretending left where they can catch the group, which really seems to fall into place. It looks like the Eastern Conference play-in right now, in some order, will be Miami, Atlanta, Toronto, and very surprising with their late rush, 2 double overtime victories, the Chicago Bulls. It's almost like the Bulls realized in the last week, we have Zach LaVine, we have DeMar DeRozan, we have Nikola Vucevic. Like, we shouldn't be this bad. We have a very good coach in Billy Donovan. Now I want to take it to the Western Conference, especially because of what happened last night, what you saw, some interesting technical fouls at the end of a game, everything that went into the Clippers. I was asked for a foreign publication to submit my choice. This was about mid-February. Magazine called Dunk Shoot in Japan. I thought it was Dunk Shot for 20 years while I was collecting checks. Apparently it's Dunk Shoot. And they asked me for my prediction of who would win the West. And at the time, I told them the Los Angeles Clippers. Yeah. And then you look at the standings. And it's, to me, Kurt, the reason I bring this up, Heat fans, we will get to you for a second here on the chat board. The reason I bring it up is this. I almost look at the Los Angeles Clippers as the Miami Heat for this reason. Oh, yeah. You kept waiting for that moment. Oh, they'll go on a 4-game winning streak. They'll win 7 of 10. They'll get hot. They'll get to where they need to be. And almost exactly like the Miami Heat, whether it's the Heat injuries with Kyle Lowry and injury management with Jimmy Butler, whether it's what's going on with Kawhi Leonard, and now in a shocking turn of events, Paul George might be hurt again. Knowing all of that put together, Kurt Helin, what the hell is wrong with the Clippers?
Yeah, it does. It's the same thing in the sense of, like, all season long. See if this sounds familiar to Heat fans. You know, once we get everybody healthy and right, it's just going to be fine, right? And once we've got to load manage our best player so that he's ready for the playoffs. But once he gets back and puts it in gear, it's going to be something different. It's always, once everything is perfect, except Ira, and everybody watching knows this, nothing's ever perfect. Nothing's ever, everything's great when everybody's healthy. And so the Clippers had been playing better lately. They had looked more like a threat. Kawhi Leonard has been brilliant. Then came the unfortunate injury, kind of fluky thing where Lou Dort collided with Paul George last night. And this doesn't, for all the load management and other complaints, this one is scaringly legit. I mean, we haven't heard
Right.
anything official yet, but we'll see what comes of it. And that would look, these teams that need everything to go perfect, it just torpedoes your season. But it's a really good analogy because they were another team. I picked them preseason. I'm like, in a wide open way, I'm like, this is the year it's going to come together for them. It's not. And it's going to be a little like Miami, but I think even way more so because of a far more impatient owner. It's going to be a really interesting offseason there. They've given this thing 4 years, and there's going to be changes.
And I wanted to draw into the Western Conference for that reason. When you look at the Western Conference standings, you have 3 elite teams, although I'm still not sold in Sacramento as Memphis is elite, but their record says otherwise. You have Denver in first place at 48-24, Memphis in second place, 44-27, Sacramento third place, the shock of the season, 43-29. And then you get to a line where everyone has the same record, and you could be 4 and you could be 10. It's the same. Yeah. So you look at these teams in terms of disappointment, and I want to go to that 4 through 6 group at the moment, and it is changing by the moment. The Phoenix Suns, what the expectations were with their previous roster before the blockbuster.
Yes.
Then they get Durant for a week, then he gets hurt. Of course, we know that Devin Booker's missed a ton of time. Chris Paul is having a little bit of a Kyle Lowry look to his game right now. Where would you put the disappointment quotient with the Phoenix Suns?
Because of the blockbuster, not as high. It was high before that because, again, this was a team that expected to be at the top of this conference, and it just didn't click for them this year. And injuries were part of that, but so was Chris Paul showing some age, and then Devin Booker missing time and not having, with Chris Paul looking slower, and DeAndre Ayton DeAndre Ayton's good.
Right.
Yeah, great. They just never came together the way they thought. But I'll tell you right now, the expectations there are through the roof. And I kind of get it in this sense. You look at that West and you're like, you talked about elite teams at the top.
Right.
I'd still say the best, not only the 3 best teams in the NBA, but maybe the 4 best teams in the NBA. Because I might think if you put the Cavs in the West,
your
top seed.
A bunch of these teams, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think, but so much of teams would rather be weirdly, for the first time in decades, I think all those teams would rather be in the West than the East. Yeah. I think Phoenix, they get Kevin Durant back with 2 or 3 games to go, and he plug and plays pretty well. Why not Phoenix? Like, I don't know who honestly, when it gets I don't know who I'm going to write down that I'm going to pick in 2 or 3 weeks. I really don't.
It's crazy. And I want to go to one other team there that I can't figure out for this reason, Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk and NBCSports.com. The Golden State Warriors have championship-proven, battle-tested players in Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, all healthy right now. Maybe not the type of supporting cast they previously had. I'd agree with you. Yeah. Their split between home and road record is practically obscene. The Golden State Warriors this season are 20-7 at home at Oracle Arena and 8-20 away from home. Kurt Helin, with battle-tested, playoff-proven players, how the hell do you explain the Golden State Warriors sitting there right now at number 6 in the Western Conference at 37-36?
Yeah, I don't have the explanation. I mean, I think the depth is part of it. I think part of it was they really did have championship hangover to start the season, and they were kind of like, we'll flip the switch when the games matter. But even Draymond was saying, it's like, you're 70 games into the season, man. If you haven't flipped the switch, you don't know where it is, right?
Right.
Like, I don't quite know, other than, and we've talked about this with Heat, sometimes it's not your year. Sometimes things just aren't clicking and aren't flowing the way you want. And there is genuine pressure on them too, because I don't know how much longer this roster is going to be together there. The core 3, they thought, I'll tell you internally, they're like, we're bringing back our core 6. They thought their young guys would step up, but it didn't click. It hasn't. It just, Jordan Poole has not been the same. Like, it's just down the line, they haven't been the same.
No, I would agree with that. There are a bunch of teams. The other team is, and we spoke about it before with the Jalen Brunson loss and the Dallas Mavericks and how they really erred in what they thought the player was or wasn't. Then they made some desperation moves. They got rid of their sort of core players who were the glue around Luka that had some success. We've seen this all the time. The NBA is not a league of one. If you have one elite player, sometimes you are nowhere. You have to have, if not a big three, that era might have gone, at least a dominant two. And even the Lakers with LeBron and Anthony Davis, that hadn't proven enough. Can you explain the Dallas Mavericks? Is it a breakdown in coaching? Some people think Jason Kidd's overrated. Is it a breakdown in the front office? For years, they had the stability of Donnie Nelson, who guided them on a nice even keel during the Nowitzki era. They got their championship against the Heat in 2011. And now it's like Mark Cuban, Mr. Shark Tank, who figures out every business deal, suddenly can't figure out his main business property, the Dallas Mavericks. Are they just a player lost in the oasis? And I want to turn this because I know Heat fans want to know about this. Could you see Luka bolting at some point and saying, I've got to find grass that's greener?
Yes, but I think it's a couple years away. He even said this year, he's in the first year of his 5 years. I think you're talking the summer of 2025 before, like it's a couple years away before that contract starts to get a little old and they haven't found anybody yet. And, you know, I mean, it's a crazy thought, but maybe Kyrie won't work out. I mean, it's possible.
Shocking Kurt Helin development. Yes.
Yeah, but they misjudged. I think this is mostly a front office thing. The misjudging of what Christian Wood was going to be for them. The trading away their biggest problem outside of, I mean, they've got a few, but their biggest problem is they defend like, I mean, their defense is. It's like watching those workout videos where guys go against chairs in the gym. Yes. Like they're just horrible defensively. Yes. So even if they go off, they lose the game. And Jason Kidd had them playing great defense last year. Ira, I don't know. Was that smoke and mirrors?
No, I think that was core defensive guys. I know they weren't great with Dorian Finney-Smith this year early, but they had those kind of gritty players. I think Jalen Brunson's one of those gritty players. Want to get to one last thing in the West, and then we're going to take a break and go Heat-centric. So if you're on the chat board with the Heat, I will get to all those things. The number 11 Western Conference Los Angeles Lakers, we don't know about LeBron. They built a nice backup core behind LeBron. Then LeBron went away. 35-37, a half game out of the number 10 spot in the West. Only 2 games out of the direct playoffs, number 6. Where do you, Los Angeles-based Kurt Helin, see the Los Angeles Lakers trending?
I think they probably get into the play-in and maybe fight their way through as the 8th seed, but they're not. The LeBron foot injury is, look, he has done everything he can humanly possible to get back, and I think part of it is that he realizes this is a pretty good team after the trade deadline. Again, if everything is right, if Anthony Davis is healthy and clicking, if he's out there playing at his level, so finally, hey, Jared Vanderbilt can defend, and D'Angelo Russell gives them the shot creation they thought they were going to get with Westbrook. And they're a pretty good team when everything's right. And so he's trying to get back. But I don't think that let's put it this way. I think you would, man, if you are Denver or Memphis, man, I do not want to see them in the first round. Like, I really do not want to see them in the first round.
There's a bunch of Western teams I don't want to see in the first round, including the Warriors. I agree. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to sort of go around. So Heat fans, as miserable as you might think you are, there's more misery around the league than maybe you think. We're going to go Heat-centric after this break on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. We'll take you through the mechanisms of how the Heat can avoid the play-in, or maybe get stuck in the play-in. We'll actually go game by game, Miami Heat, Brooklyn Nets schedule, maybe discuss the outside chance of catching the New York Knicks. So we're Heat-centric after this break on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. And we're back for our second segment this week on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. Myra Winderman from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel here in Fort Lauderdale. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk, NBCSports.com, out in the Los Angeles area. If you missed our first segment, we talked about the NBA disappointment factor. And as much as Heat fans might have expected more, number 1, you're not alone in the NBA. Number 2, the Heat still are tied for the 10th best record in the NBA. So 2/3 of the teams are worse. So maybe it's not as bad as you think. If you missed that, you can catch it anywhere where the Big O podcasts can be found. Just go find that. You can also smash our like buttons on social media. You also can join us on our YouTube chat. And Kurt, I'm going to go here quick because I don't want to let people think we're leaving them hanging. So it's going to be a little scattershot. Then we will get back and talk playoffs. Feel free, folks, to chime in here if you'd like also. Jean Rosario, or Gene Rosario, again, never know which direction to go with these. Hey, Ira, do you think Duncan Robinson will ever crack meaningful minutes again? Not just 2 minutes left in a blowout. Gene or John? Duncan Robinson, to me, is a swing factor because when Duncan Robinson is good, he changes the defense. He opens up passing lanes. He opens up driving lanes. He opens up the post. But he's a defensive sieve. And there was a point where Eric Spoelstra realized that he was unplayable, and he turned to Max Strus. And then Max Strus said, you know what? I'm going to start shooting about 28% on three-pointers. And he wasn't the answer also. So, Kurt Helin, I want to phrase the question to you this way. The utter NBA liability defensively, no offense, I think even Duncan might come close to realizing he's not an elite defender, versus the elite three-point shooter. You had one out there with the Clippers who they let go, and I was surprised, in Luke Kennard. Yeah. He then went to the Memphis Grizzlies. Doesn't play a lot. When he played the Grizzlies last week, I'm like, wait, Luke Kennard is here? I hadn't seen his name much. What's your thinking, talking to scouts and people around the league, about the one-way shoot-only player? Has the league become offensive-oriented enough where you can deal with it and should? Or is it a matter of no matter what you're getting on one end, if you're giving up too much on the other end, coaches just won't play you? Discuss Duncan Robinson and that overall concept of the one-way shooter.
I think that there's a movement away from that a little bit, unless you've got such good defensive players around said player. Like, you know, it looks a lot better if, I don't know, Rudy Gobert or Joel Embiid are back there protecting, right? You know what I mean? But in general, I think you're starting to see, like with Luke, if you're one-dimensional players like that just get torched on defense in this all offensive theory, you've got to get some stop. You know, we're talking about all the offense and all the offense these guys bring, and I think you're right with Duncan. I think he can have value. But if you're that bad defensively, scouting is just better now than it was 20 years ago. And even in the middle of the season, hey, Duncan's out here, target him. Like in a way that didn't happen before. Guys get targeted now, and it's like it just limits how much you can play them.
Yeah, it's the pick and roll game. It's teams switching everything or forced into switches. It's almost like literally a player dribbles down court. He points to the defender that he wants to be guarded by. Yep. He has that guy bring the screen up top. They have to switch it because some of these guys, Trae Young, other guys, Damian Lillard, have this 30-foot range that if you don't switch it above the key, the guy just going to lock and launch from there and shoot it at a high enough percentage. So I sort of get that. But here's my question, Kurt Helin, because you and I discussed this. When we discuss the trading deadline, the buyout deadline, free agency, we say you also have to take a long view on this. So this is what Ira Winderman doesn't understand. Duncan Robinson gets this contract. Joe Harris gets this contract. Davis Bertans gets this contract. Yeah. Luke Kennard got a contract. All these guys got paid solely as shooters. In the short term, maybe it worked out. But 2-3 years down the line, they all look like terrible deals. Didn't they see this league evolving? Has this evolution happened so quick that they just didn't see it coming? Or did they simply, the Miami Heat, and again, folks, if you're eating breakfast, put the spoon down right now, put the waffle back on the plate. Duncan Robinson, 5 years, $90 million, and does not play. Kurt Helin, shouldn't there have been more forethought and foresight?
Yeah, but I think that it's kind of easy to say that now. Like you said, you're talking about Miami, the Clipper front office, which was generally considered really smart. I mean, you're generally talking about smart front offices whose coaches have said, hey, I realize you signed this guy because he brings a specific, incredibly needed and valuable skill set to the table, but I can't play him. I think this is, I don't want to say Eric Spoelstra's like not talking to these guys, but like at the end of the day, he's got to win games and he can't play Duncan. And as much as on paper, Duncan Robinson helps you. And like you said, there are games, it feels like he does. Same with Max. But if you're not hitting him if you're that guy, you've got to be what, 40%? Like,
you've got to be uber elite. I'm still not so sure that's enough because it means you're missing 60% of them. And in the view of some of these coaches, and it's not true, they almost think that Duncan Robinson is giving up 100% shooting by his man. Just because when it looks bad, it looks really bad. So I just think that's sort of a curious thing that, again, folks, and that's the reason I answered Gene's question is it's not just the Heat who made that choice on a shooter only. What's interesting is there was a point in the Heat's history when they had a two-time winner of the three-point contest during All-Star Weekend in Jason Capono, and they elected not to pay him and let him go to Toronto because they felt the defense was so lacking it didn't work. Now you have this latest evolution. You know who's going to get screwed by this, Kurt Helin? Max Strus. Because the Heat cannot afford to give Max Strus the Duncan Robinson contract because other people saw the Duncan Robinson contract that he gave, and I think Max is almost going to pay for the sins, quote unquote, of Duncan Robinson.
And it's going to be interesting to see if another team tries to they're not going to pay him, but we can get him because we were, is there a team out there, Ira, that doesn't, is there a front office and say, once we get him in our system, it's going to be totally different. They all think that.
Yeah, no, and again, he'll get something. I just don't think – I think the Joe Harris and the Duncan Robinson contracts are a thing of the past. Edward Thurston chimes in here and said the Heats have offense and defensive rebounding problems. Their inside game needs to improve for them to be better. This is another trend in the NBA. The Heat had some answers at power forward. Then they let P.J. Tucker go to the Philadelphia 76ers because they said, we're not giving a guy who's going to be 40 years old in the third year of a contract $12 million. We don't see that as prudent business. And they played smaller ball. There's a bunch of teams around the NBA right now, including the Brooklyn Nets, who we'll get to, I promise, folks, in this Eastern Conference playoffs, who are undersized also. A bunch of teams who are playing natural threes at the four. Kurt, again, that was a trend in the league, to go smaller, to go five out. The Heat are featuring Kevin Love at center sometimes now instead of bringing in Omer Yurtseven while Cody Zeller is out with his broken nose. This trend toward small ball, this trend toward a smaller power forward, is that just the three-point trend, or is that sort of coaches thinking they're smart enough they can pull it off, and is that problematic?
I think it's the three-point trend, and you've got to get those points in the paint, but we tend to think of it like, well, we've got to get points in the paint by getting it to Bam so he can hit his little 12-foot floater. No, Jimmy Butler can get you points in the paint. Frankly, Tyler Hero can get you points in the paint. Like, you can about to come back tonight, Ja Morant might be the best example of this. He gets you a ton of points in the paint because he just gets by everybody. Like, you can get them in different ways, but at the end of the day, you still got to get to – James Harden was, hey, free throws, threes, and at the rim. Like, he still gets to the rim and finishes. If you don't get inside and get those points, you're in trouble. And I think teams became so enamored with the floor spacing and that – you just didn't have those drives. You didn't have that shot creation. You didn't bend the defense the way you need to.
Big Dan 305 says the Heat, scroll up here, the Heat ran it back and fell in their face again. This is on Pat. It's the second time it's happened. No, Big Dan, it's probably the third or fourth time it's happened. The Heat brought him back with James Johnson, Dion Waiters. That didn't work out. The Heat went to the 2020 NBA Finals, thought they were good enough. Brought back Myers Leonard. Most of that team were swept out of the first round in 2021 by the Milwaukee Bucks. Then after last season, within one shot of the NBA Finals, the Heat are teetering right now, 6-7 seed, not exactly where they want. Kurt, I want to throw it to you another way. Again, this is sort of like our first segment of you can find optimism in the pessimism for this reason. The Miami Heat have been to the Eastern Conference Finals 2 of the last 3 years. They might have a puncher shot this season of getting back there, depending on matchups. If they wind up with the Sixers in the first round, and maybe they get a team that has an injury in Milwaukee or Boston in the second round, you don't know. Kurt Helin, you write all kinds of rankings of teams, of future rankings, things like that, at Pro Basketball Talk. If I were to tell you I had a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals 2 of the last 3 years, would you say they are a failure? Would you say they are doing a good job? And the real question I want you to answer this, Kurt Helin, is, would you say that a bunch of teams would take that without asking any questions?
Well, a bunch of teams would. By the way, yeah, I've got NBA power rankings coming out later this week, and I'll just say now that the Heat are not in the top 5. I'll just throw it out there.
Shocking development.
Yeah, I think they're. I think I have them 10 or 11. They
sounds right.
I think there's a lot of teams. There's a lot of owners, frankly, that would be good with that. I don't know if all the front offices would, because there's that ring or bust culture in a lot of front offices. But I think there's a lot of owners who would be like, hey, man, how many playoff games did we get? How many games did we get to host, and extra income did we bring in and keep the fan base engaged? Like, I think there's a lot of owners who would jump at that kind of consistency and ability. And by the way, you talked about the Heat 5 or 6. I talked with an executive this week who was discussing, if you were Philadelphia and or Boston, would you tank a little and maybe give up the set? If find a way to avoid Miami in the first round, even if it meant costing you the home court in the second round, because I just don't want to see them.
Yeah, no, and again, and I'm getting that from Heat fan also. You're better in the play-in if you can get Philadelphia. No, you're never better in the play-in. You're never better in a playoff round where if you lose 1 or 2 games, your season is over. You don't want to fight to survive the week of April 10th. You want to be able to get to 4 of 7, have a couple of bad moments, and still be in a playoff series. Yeah. There's a big difference there. That's not the Heat's choice. The Heat's choice is to all-out chase Brooklyn. We will get to that in an upcoming segment or maybe in the next couple of minutes. Big Dan comes back and goes, if the Heat are stuck in the middle, when do you blow this team up and change the pieces? Well, this is interesting because you've had blow-up teams that were sort of stuck in the middle. To me, Washington Wizards stand out. They try to blow it up with John Wall. They try to blow it up with Russell Westbrook. They then blew it up with Spencer Dinwiddie and made the Kristaps Porzingis trade. And they're no better than where they were and probably have less star power than where they previously had. That's one team. You and I just spoke about the Dallas Mavericks and Mark Cuban trying to work through all these combinations to make it work for Luka Doncic. And honestly, they have probably taken a step back in that shape also. The team I expected to blow it up was the Chicago Bulls. We thought during the season, you and I spoke at the trading deadline, DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic. In some cases, you have contracts coming up. You're going to have to renew certain guys. They kept it steady. They're going to get to the play-in. Maybe that's enough for their fans also. Kurt, the danger of blowing it up in the middle, isn't that easier said than done?
Yeah. And by the way, you mentioned Mark Cuban. He's the king of that. He blew up a championship team. He had a team that won a ring with Dirk Nowitzki, and now they were coming out of the lockout and things were a little weird. He's like, the grass is always greener for some people, and it's way easier to say that than to execute it, even in the offseason. It doesn't, as midseason, it rarely pans out. And offseason, even then, everybody. I don't know. The way things fit together, the chemistry, you bring in so much unknown that unless you're bringing in Kevin Durant, there's just not much you can be sure of.
Yeah, again, the whole blow it up, even with the Heat, I think you have to be a little bit careful what you wish for when you're only 1 year removed from the Eastern Conference Finals. So, again, I can understand that, but there's part 2 of that, Kurt Helin. Do you have the patience to do that?
Yeah.
Kurt, you follow fan bases. You follow lack of patience. Are there places, do you think, Utah's a perfect example now? They were a perennial playoff team with a very good coach in Quinn Snyder, a defensive player of the year in Rudy Gobert, a young, emerging scoring talent in Donovan Mitchell, but they couldn't make the playoff breakthrough. So Danny Ainge, Dwayne Wade come in, they clear house and start all over again. Utah's a one major league city. That's all they have is their Jazz. So they have no choice to be patient because they can't go watch their baseball team, their football team, their hockey team. I know they have an MLS team. Are there many markets like that would even tolerate that, Kurt Helin?
Yeah, not many. I think there's not many fan bases, and especially ones who, like you said, have options. Sacramento put up with it, but again, what else were you going to do? They got some AAA baseball. It's not in a city like Miami, or especially a Miami Heat franchise where the fans are used to a certain level of success. This has been such a good franchise for so long. I don't think you get that tolerance. You certainly don't get it anywhere along the Northeast corridor. I was going to say, would Wizards fans care? But we'd have to poll all 5 of them to find out.
Yes, exactly. Get them in the same place at the same time. So I totally get that. Lenny Pena says here, please tell me we're not bringing back these undrafted players. They have all hit their ceiling. We need to add more young drafted talent on this team. Kurt, you've written, and we've talked about this story about Heat players like Duncan Robinson and Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and Omar Yurtseven. I sort of agree with Lenny. I think there's a point where you realize Nice stories make for really good video features by your team's marketing department, but at some point you only go so far with former G League talent. Your thoughts?
Isn't the trick with them, though, selling high? Like, to me, like, and maybe you would probably re-sign Gabe this summer, but hey, we found Duncan Robinson. We've got him at a peak and some value, and we're about to pay him. Is that when you trade those guys for players you can trust a little more? Yeah. And that doesn't mean you drafted versus undrafted can be. We can go down the long list of missed draft players, but sure. I think that there's something for just using. Hey, we developed this guy. We've got a reputation for this. Maybe we get out at a high as opposed
and I think they could have used Max Strus as a trade chip to offload some stuff, at the deadline, like you and I spoke about, and they bypassed that. Want to try to clear up the chat board as much as I can, so I'm going to get to a couple more real quick. Then, Sean, we'll go to the break. T. Strafacci, I hope I get that right, says we need to try to get rid of Lowry this offseason to get someone like Terry Rozier. Well, it's not like Terry Rozier doesn't get hurt, but that's another story for another day. Kurt, your thought on a tradable final year contract. Kyle's going to have about $30 million, 1 year left. Everyone keeps talking about, expiring contracts, so get rid of them. Kevin Love, to me, was the case study this year. He had a similar deal to Kyle Lowry. Everyone thought Cleveland would put that in play for another veteran. Didn't work. The expiring contract isn't what it used to be, is it?
No, it's not even close. They don't have that much value. Frankly, you're going to have to put some kind of sweetener probably next to Kyle to move that contract. I'm not saying that's not a good idea still, that it's just time to move on, but you're going to have to add a pick or a young player or something. You're going to have to add. No,
I agree.
Lowry is salary ballast in whatever you do this summer.
I agree. And last one before we go to the break from Edward, I think the Heat needs to stop trading their picks away for vets and get the younger guys out of college. Well, they still owe Oklahoma City a lottery-protected pick in 24, or else it's unprotected in 25, so they're not quite there. Personally, I believe they will use their 2023 this June first-round pick as a sweetener to get some money off the books, whether it's Victor Oladipo, whether it's Kyle Lowry. So we'll see that also. So, Edward, I know that's not the answer you wanted, but hey, Kurt and I can say whatever the hell we want. Anyway, I promise we're going to look at the Heat and Nets playoff race, game against the Knicks tonight. So we'll combine that in our final segment here on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint, talk about the Heat's upcoming schedule. We will get to that. If you want to get back to the chat board, I'll try to squeeze in a few more also. All of that and more after this break on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. And we're back for our third and final segment this week of our typical 9 a.m. Wednesday RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel here in Fort Lauderdale. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk, NBCSports.com, out in the Los Angeles area. And Kurt, I promised we would get to this. And I want to go over schedules also. The Brooklyn Nets last night lost a game that was closer than it looked at the finish because of some free throw problems. The Nets lost at home to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who they also play on Thursday. The Miami Heat tonight hosting the New York Knicks, coming off a brutal loss when Julius Randle scores 57. They still can't find a way to win against an unbelievably shorthanded Minnesota Timberwolves team that didn't even have Anthony Edwards on Monday at the Garden. So that's the matchup now. The Heat are within half a game of the Brooklyn Nets. They play Brooklyn on Saturday here at Miami-Dade Arena, but Brooklyn already has the tiebreaker. This is a 3-game season series. The Nets are up 2-0. So really the half-game lead is 1.5 games. And I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm sure you haven't looked at the schedule, and maybe you have ahead of time when we were talking about possibly going through this exercise right now. Kurt, the way things are trending, from what you see from both the Heat and the Brooklyn Nets, I'll set it up again. A half a game between the Heat at number 7, the Nets at number 6, coming down the stretch here, a meeting Saturday in Miami-Dade Arena. Number 6 gets a direct ticket to the playoffs, plays the number 3 seed, opening round best of 7. Number 7 has to either beat the number 8 team at home, or if it loses that game, has to beat the winner of the 9-10 game at home in order to get to the playoffs. Number 7 seed loses 2 games in 1 week. On the Tuesday and Friday after the regular season finale, they are done, no playoffs. Kurt, how do you see Heat Nets playing out?
I like the Heat in that one. I just don't think the Nets, and I think you saw it last night, I think there's a real ceiling with all the nice players they have. If you roll in and think we've got them, you're in trouble. Unless it's one of those games where, hey, Spencer Dinwiddie goes off. It's still the NBA. Mm-hmm. Miami should be able at home to kind of bully them. They're not that strong inside. They've got a lot of nice players, like we've said, but not great. Like, anyway, I think Miami should win that game. And by the way, I think what's most important, Ira, play with the desperation the urgency we've been waiting for in that game. That's where you got to see it, right? Because I think they can catch them, but Brooklyn has the easier schedule. They have the third easiest schedule in the league remaining, actually. But I think they can catch them, but that game becomes literally must win. If you make it 2.5, it's too big. Yeah.
We'd have 9 games left, probably have to go at least 6-3, probably even better than that starting tonight with the Knicks to catch Brooklyn because of the way the schedules go. But the must win is the Saturday game there. Last time they played, Mikal Bridges scored 40+. Was a difference maker in that game. His best game as a member of the Brooklyn Nets, career high. So they have to watch out for that. The good thing is there for the Heat. They have a 2-day break before that game. So you give Eric Spoelstra a little more time to game plan, as you know, Kurt, from what you've seen in the playoffs in recent years. You wind up in better shape. So I want to take people through the exercise because I think this is important. Kurt, usually we'll do this in football. The schedule will come out and we'll go win, loss. We'll go through it. I want to play this exercise with you to give people perspective on the Brooklyn schedule, if you wouldn't mind. So we're going to start on Thursday. Kurt Helin, the Cleveland Cavaliers stayed over. They're back in Brooklyn for a game at Barclays against the Nets on Thursday. Cleveland at Brooklyn. If you were to make a prediction, no money line, no points line, just on who wins the game, Cleveland at Brooklyn on Thursday.
Yeah, just a money line bet. I'd take Cleveland, but Ira, we've talked all season about when you play those back-to-back baseball series, it is hard to get both wins. Cleveland is the better team, but it's going to take another big night from Donovan Mitchell just dunking all over guys, which was a great highlight from last night. It's going to take that kind of performance again because it's just hard, those back-to-backs.
Okay, the Saturday game, Miami Heat hosting the Brooklyn Nets.
Like I said, I'll take the Heat. I'll take the Heat at home.
Yeah, again, Brooklyn will be in town on a Friday night. They'll be 1 day less rested. It should work in favor of the Heat. It's a quick turnaround for the Nets. They then have to go up to Orlando after playing an 8 o'clock game on Saturday in Miami. They have a 6 o'clock game against Orlando. The standings would tell you that this is a Brooklyn game, but Orlando's been playing everyone tough.
Yeah.
Second night of a back-to-back for the Brooklyn Nets in Orlando on Sunday. Your thoughts?
I actually kind of like Orlando there because the second night of the back-to-back. And like you said, Orlando, hey, don't look now. Markelle Fultz is good. Markelle Fultz is legitimately playing very, very nice basketball down there. He has found his way. And that's him with Paolo Banchero and some Franz Wagner, some other, there's something there. They got some work to do, but they're a tough out right now.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that Orlando doesn't have as much talent as this reconfigured Brooklyn lineup, to be honest with you right now. Like you said, with Banchero, with a bunch of Wagners in there, with the way that Markelle Fultz has been playing, with Cole Anthony can go off on games. The guard play hasn't been great, but they have chances. The Nets then get 2 days off, go home against the Houston Rockets. Houston at Brooklyn, Wednesday, March 29th.
Yeah, we're giving that one to Brooklyn. Houston's horrible. I mean, they did win a couple games this week. But
and I'm going to go another way for this reason. Houston is bad enough. They basically secured a bottom lottery seed. So I don't think that's a case where Steven Silas is pulling players out necessarily afraid to win. And they have thrown scares into teams. So should be a Nets win, would not be shocked. 2 days later, they host the Atlanta Hawks, the sort of up and down Hawks. Friday, the 31st of March, Atlanta at Brooklyn. Your thoughts, Kurt Helin?
As little as I trust Atlanta, that's got to be the same way we were just talking about with the Heat. They've got to win Saturday night. This is a must win. Wouldn't you be thinking that way if you're Atlanta going in? Don't Trae Young
it has to be must win for this reason.
Yeah.
Atlanta, where they are, if they don't catch the Heat at 7, they're trying to hold off. Toronto's only a half a game back.
Yeah.
Chicago's only 1 game back. If you wind up in that having to win twice scenario, all of a sudden it becomes that much more difficult. Atlanta should be desperate. Kurt Helin, I don't know what desperate Atlanta looks like. I don't think they give a rat's ass.
And I don't think – look, I think that – talk about a team that's going to see some shifts in the offseason. And I don't mean they're trading Trae. I just think you're going to see some shifts.
Okay, so that's Friday night. Sunday, April 2nd, the Utah Jazz visit Brooklyn for a matinee. Utah's competitive as hell. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd probably still take Brooklyn, but Utah has had a couple wins lately, and Lauri Markkanen's good. Like, legitimately, maybe all NBA good. They are capable of, like you said, they're not a pushover. They are actually, you're going to have to earn that win.
Right. So you have the Jazz game. The Jazz also, I think, are the point of no return for lottery playing around. They're not going to be as bad as they thought. They are in the play, and they might push for it. 2 days later, Tuesday, April 4th, the Minnesota Timberwolves visit. Anthony Edwards should be healthy by then. Karl Anthony Towns might be back then. Minnesota at Brooklyn on April 4th.
Yeah, and you should get a slightly desperate Minnesota team because they're in that clump in the middle of we were talking about in the West where it's seeding's going to matter. Getting some wins is going to matter. My only question with them is once you put Towns back in, that was messy to start the season. I'm really curious what happens when you shove him back in with 8 games to go.
That opens a back-to-back. The next night, they're at Detroit. The only reason or way or anything I can give you for Detroit with that game would be to have some pride in one of their final home games of the season.
Yeah, and it is a back-to-back, so you never quite know, but Detroit's horrible. So
and then they play their home against the Magic. This is on Friday, April 7th.
I'd be tempted to lean Brooklyn at home just because they'll be desperate, and I don't know at that point. It's when you get to those final games, Ira, doesn't it become hard to predict because you're like, hey man, we're just going to shut Paolo down for the last 4 games. Like you don't know what weird stuff is going to happen.
You don't know where you are there, which brings me to their season finale on April 9th at home against the Sixers. On one hand, the Sixers could be in a desperate fight with the Boston Celtics for number 2. With the game being a 1 o'clock game, they won't know Boston's result ahead of time. So I think that's another toss-up game. The Sixers are clearly better than the Nets. But will Embiid play? Will Harden play? Will they be playing for anything? I think you would agree, Kurt Helin, if the Sixers are locked into a seed, they play no one in that game, correct?
Correct. And Doc might suit up for that game if that's the case.
He was a good point guard in his day. The point I'm trying to make, Heat fan, is this. I know people are saying Brooklyn rather is teetering. The Heat have their number. But if you look at winnable games for Brooklyn, they're at Orlando. They're home against Houston. They're home against Utah. They're at Minnesota. They're home against Minnesota, rather. They're at Detroit. They're home against Orlando. There are a bunch of winnable games there where they could win half their games, which means the Heat will almost have to win out. So now I'm going to turn to the other side of this exercise. We'll start with tonight. New York Knicks coming off that ugly, tough, difficult loss against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The last time the Knicks were here, you had Julius Randle score 43 points, make a 3-pointer off of his hip with 1.7 seconds remaining. How do you look at tonight's New York at Miami?
Yeah, I think that's actually my favorite game to watch tonight. I'm excited about that one just because I think these are two fairly evenly matched teams, honestly, with how hard aren't the Knicks doing what we kept saying the Heat always do, which is they just outplay harder than everybody in the regular season
Tom
right
Thibodeau
now.
has the right players for the right system for his team. It's sort of must win for the Heat, and again, they've had a 2-day break before this game. So if Eric Spoelstra wants to game plan more for Julius Randle, remember, the last time they played, Jalen Brunson went out, was not available, second half with an injury. So the Knicks come in stronger. Hell of a test tonight. Then we go to Saturday's game against Brooklyn. You've already given your thoughts on that, that the Heat either, honestly, win or shut it down and just deal with play-in if you lose that. Doesn't get any easier. At Toronto next Tuesday, we know the Raptors' desperation. Thoughts on Miami Heat at Toronto Raptors, Tuesday, March 28th.
And they're tough to beat at home. And we've talked about before how they're just kind of awkward to play against, even though they've been a lot better with Jakob Poeltl. Actually they've got rim protection in the middle now, and that's mattered a lot for them. And it's kind of opened things up. They've been playing better. And
then second night of a back-to-back, right after that game, got to clear customs, go down to New York and play at the Garden against the New York Knicks.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Second night of a back-to-back like that is against like you said, a Knicks team is going to play hard, especially at home. That's a tough ask. So I talked to someone who's around the Heat, and they said, look, we could lose these next 4. Home against New York, home against Brooklyn, at Toronto, at New York. To me, this is the 4-game litmus test of who are you? What do you stand for? What can you be? Kurt Helin, by the time you and I speak next week on our InRecover.com Inside the Paint Show, and we see the start of this trend,
I think you'll get a sense of whether the Heat do have another gear, because there probably can't be a better test than home against New York, home against the ultimate showdown against Brooklyn, at Toronto, and at New York. I think those four determine. Then you come home from that road trip, you play the Dallas Mavericks Saturday, April 1st. You're expecting Luka Doncic and Kyrie to be back. Kurt, I think you'd agree, Dallas will be desperate on that game.
Bet the over. Yeah. They like I said, they don't defend, but they're not easy to beat. They put up a lot of points, and we know Luka can be absolutely clutch in those close games. They're tough.
Yeah. So again, the schedule doesn't relent. The Heat then go to Detroit again, second time in 3 weeks. The last time they played the Pistons, they were down 2 points with 4 minutes to go. They've got to get it right. On that trip, they then go to Philadelphia. That's still with a week or with 4 days left in the season. That'll be a game that the Sixers – look, I'll just throw it to you, Kurt Helin. Second game of a road trip for the Miami Heat, first night of a back-to-back, April 6th at Philadelphia. Who's your favorite in that game? Philadelphia, Miami?
Philadelphia is my favorite. I'd be picking them. And what's the second game?
And then they go to Washington the next night. I think the Wizards –
Would you be thinking, hey, if we're not doing well, let's pull it in and make sure we've got legs under us for the second game?
If you need only one of those 2 wins, yes, Kurt Helin, I agree. Just like they didn't play Kyle Lowry in Chicago on Saturday and did play him, and he was a difference maker playing all 12 minutes of the fourth quarter Sunday in Detroit. So yes, Kurt Helin, I totally agree with that. But I'm trying to set up so people know. Then they finish their season home on April 9th against the Orlando Magic. What I'm trying to set up here, Kurt, is the Heat have a tough schedule. The Nets have a winnable schedule. I think we'll see who the Heat are and what the Heat are. Kurt, Your Honor, I've just given you the case for the prosecution and the defense. You've seen the Nets schedule. You've seen the Heat schedule. You know the Nets are still a half a game up on the Heat. You know the Nets have the tiebreaker. Your Honor, with the defense I presented of the Heat schedule, with what I presented of the Nets schedule, now who are you picking to get the number 6 seed?
I'm still picking Miami. I still believe that they've got another gear that they can hit, and I think it's easier to watch, with all due respect to how well Jacques Vaughn has done. That's a team that I feel like is more likely to let go of the rope. Interesting there. So I want to give Heat perspective. I want to thank everyone for chiming in on the chat board, from Edward to Gene, who said it is pronounced Gene like the pants. So I appreciate that. Brian and Robert and T and Lenny and everyone who caught us. We'll be back next week with another full hour on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. We hope we sort of answered some questions. Maybe in our first segment, reduced some of your Heat angst. 10th best record in the NBA. No one goes, we're number 10. But remember, there are 20 teams that are worse. So have a good day, because we're trying to present as much of a glass half full as we can today. And look, him over there says the Heat are going directly to the playoffs. We'll catch you next week. He's Kurt Helin. I'm Ira Winderman. This has been redrecover.com Inside the Paint, and the Big O Show rolls on.
You've been listening.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.